In the ancient world, there were many geometric shapes that possessed powerful meanings within them. Things like the pentagram, this what we know as the Star of David, the cross, and many others have been, their meaning has been diluted to the ownership of a particular group. And you see this mistake being made by many political commentators as well as pastors and other, groups of people, religious figures, etc., etc. But the mistake is of letting these symbols go to that particular group when they have, like I mentioned before, such deeply rooted and more powerful meanings that go beyond the group's ownership. So you see political commentators like Candace, for example, that sees these symbols in previous cultures and groups, and because these were associated with, let's say, pagan rituals or something like that, she just blankets it that that symbol is evil for all of mankind or almost for all times, especially when she talks about in relationship to Israel and other things. Now, the problem with this is that it kind of creates this chain where the meaning is even carried over to the way we practice. And so if we see somebody, bowing or something like that, we'll say, oh, the pagans did that, so that must be a pagan practice, in the same way that we treat those symbols. So let's break down a little bit why these symbols and meanings are so powerful, and does not equate with some kind of morality in it either. Now, let's start with the most kind of like easiest one, which is the pentagram. Now, the pentagram in our modern times is often associated with evil or Satanist, and for good reason. Jonathan Pajot did a great job of breaking down the meaning of a pentagram. But let's just quickly go over it so that to get a little more understanding of where I'm coming from. Now, the pentagram is, an upside down star. You have these points of multiplicity, the four points up on top that leads to the single point on the bottom, showing, for example, the single person going out into multiplicity, whereas a regular star has the 4 points on the bottom and the one on the top, and you have multiplicity coming into union. Now, each of it serves its purpose. There are times when, for example, you worship to God or you go to church where you have multiplicity of peoples and cultures coming together to the single point in order to direct our attention to the one true God, right? The one single purpose, the purpose of all unity at the top of the star. Another way to help you better visualize it, if you view something like the pyramid as well as the star, right? So you have 4 points on the bottom and the single point on the top. And so you have multiplicity coming together to form one single unity. Now, if you reverse that and you put the pyramid or the star upside down, then you have the 1 point on the bottom and the 4 on the top. Now, this showcases kind of like a breakdown of unity, you can say, where the individual becomes many. And so, you have the issues of, for example, the demons, where they say we are legion. You can see that they always express themselves through multiplicity of many and not just one unity. Now, the breakdown of an individual to multiplicity serves both a good purpose and a bad purpose, and is not strictly in a sense of evil or pagan in practice, and is just a expression of meaning. Now, the pentagram is most accurate, you can say, in representing the demonic pattern, but it's not only a demonic pattern. You have, for example, certain church fathers that mention that the demons are the left hand of God and the angels are the right. And so you see that kind of like paradox or difference in meaning, where there's an aspect of God that separates and there's another aspect of God that brings together, right? So with right hand with the angels, he brings people to him, or kind of like brings into one. And then the left hand is something like almost like a punch and a breakdown of that multiplicity that's showed to us through these symbols. Now, the same thing with the star, what's known today as the Star of David, or the Israeli flag. And you have this also with ancient occult practices and stuff like that, in terms of worship of Saturn and other things. And this symbol showcases, similar in a way of what the pentagram does, but it's a relationship of opposites. And so you have the upright triangle and the upside down triangle that come together and form this star. And it's showing how unity and opposites can come together. It's also very similar, the symbol of, for example, alchemy, where you have the points and it directs to opposites, but the opposites kind of what's bring us together. You can also think of something like primary colors coming together and being opposites and creating other colors in the process, or something like that. And so it's a joining of opposites. As you can see, these symbols are all very powerful and they have a specific meaning associated with them. And it would be a shame to give away those powerful symbols to somebody else. What I mentioned before is that this kind of mentality, or this kind of drawing of conclusions of associating, this particular group has this symbol, and so that means that that symbol is evil, it becomes problematic, because that expands to the process of worship through body, you can say, right? And so Catholics and Orthodox always are accused by Protestants, for example, of, you cannot have imagery or statues or something like that, because if you bow before them, or if you venerate them, or show any signs of what would associate as worship, it becomes a pagan or an idol, right? Which is also not true. So it's funny, because they wouldn't come to the same conclusion when it comes to shaking hands. I'm sure pagans, for example, did it first, but they wouldn't call that a pagan practice. And we can all, and the thing is that shaking hands in itself is a type of ritual as well. And so here is what comes to kind of like what Jonathan calls kind of the fractality of meaning, or kind of the building of meaning of hierarchy of meaning, where, similar to what we explained to the pentagram, for example, but and it's not the upside down form, but the regular star with the point up, is that each form of ritual that we do in our lives, from drinking coffee to brushing our teeth to meeting other people to going to work and going through all these minor rituals for minor goods, you can say, at some point all join together for us to be able to go to church, right? And so all these rituals for ourselves, to keep ourselves alive, of eating, of cooking, of going to work, and all that stuff, also comes with us in meeting and unity at the site of worship, right? At the church that we go to. These meanings have a purpose, and the purpose isn't just in a lens of morality, but through meaning. And so here it becomes the problem, because if you can, in terms of, for example, what I mentioned with the Protestants, is that it's not okay, for example, to kneel before a statue, even though you're praying in direct unity to God. But for some reason, it is okay to put your hand across your heart when you do the Pledge of Allegiance, or to shake hands when you're meeting somebody else. And that becomes kind of this tricky situation of, okay, do pagans own that particular ritual forever? In the same way, do they own that symbol forever? Or is that meaning allowed to live in other ways? Now, the interesting with this as well is you see all these images, for example, of Baphomet, where he has the hand pointing up and the other one pointing below. And it's, as above, as below kind of thing, that's associated as well with a demonic pattern. But there's plenty of statues as well as iconography that depicts Christ doing the same thing. Now, the problem isn't the hand gestures in of itself that points to a particular meaning, but when you have when you look at the particular character, or you could say almost like a particular archetype that does those symbols, you see how the meaning of that symbol stays the same to some extent, but their target or something becomes different based on the character doing it. So Christ doing as above as below kind of symbolizes his kingship, right? Where there's this, in a way, there's like everything that happens in heavens and the spiritual world is also true of the earthly realm, or, kind of the uniting of those things, and that he owns both above and below. But if you do that, swap out that character, so to speak, to a demonic one, then there's that same meaning, but through the purpose of that character, it changes. And so the same thing happens with these practices or rituals. And so this is the problem when I see, Catholics fall for this too, where they see a particular symbol and it goes off as demonic, and the meaning and purpose work together. And so we have to look at meaning and purpose and see what it is aimed or targeted for. So another way to think of this is something like, a gun. You always hear people say, like, it's not the gun that kills people, it's a person carrying it. And so the symbols and the rituals work in the same way to some extent, where you can point at a gun at a person for both offensive and defensive reasons, but what the outcome doesn't change in terms of, like, the same thing with the meaning of the symbols doesn't change, but the purpose does change. Whether are you pointing that gun to rob somebody, or are you pointing that gun in order to protect your family from being, killed? And so in that same manner, we won't say that both of those are equivalent. So I don't understand why we do the same thing with these geometric shapes. You have this issue all the time where you have churches that have Christ doing that as above as below, or you have triangles or a particular thing that's associated with the Illuminati. But just because those symbols exist in those realms does not mean that it's like that. And so I think if we think about the symbols in terms of their meaning and how they're being aimed through purpose, would give us a much wiser view in terms of our predictions or, understanding of a group of people. And just because you see these symbols repeated through time doesn't mean that their meaning hold to the same thing. It doesn't mean that everyone who has the Star of David is associated with, occultist rituals through Saturn. It just means that there's a pattern of opposites there. So I hope this was helpful, and I hope it would give you a little more nuance when you're thinking about looking at practice of ritual through body as well as through shapes in our world, and hopefully give you a little bit more ease in terms of showcasing that not everything's evil, and it's even shame on us for giving up such powerful symbolism to evil groups instead of embracing them as our own. So, if you enjoyed this content, please like and subscribe to the channel. I know it has been a while, but this is a tough thing to always come up with ideas and do. This is something I've seen recently in the kind of online world and the political world going on. There's kind of this return to dissecting meaning and who is who as we're searching for answers and trying to follow the good as opposed to the bad. And hope you will tune into the next one. Bye.